Hello, and welcome to Property Matters. I'm Stephen Galpin, and today I want to be talking about property development and how the green aspect of property development is gradually becoming more and more important to us each and every day. We have our government who are keen to demonstrate that they're keen to encourage green development, and I'm very lucky today to have with us a representative of one of Britain's biggest developers, that's Barratt Developments. And I have the Technical and Innovation Director, Oliver Novakovic, with me. Welcome to you.
Thank you, Stephen.
Oliver, the first thing I want to say is that probably it's the generation that I'm from. I'm just rather sceptical about all these new ideas coming into property development. And I have a couple of worries. One is the speed and effectiveness of whatever we're bringing in. And secondly, the social aspects of what we're bringing in. Now, what I mean by that, just on the social aspects, so we can talk generally to start with. If you take a £100,000 starter home, for instance, perhaps based somewhere in the middle of the country, it's not an easy job to add £20,000 or £30,000 worth of green innovations, heat pumps, those sort of things, extra innovation to a house that's costing £100,000. That would be a third of the cost. So it does become easier at the higher end of the market, but that of course means that more well-off people are going to benefit from this than perhaps the people who can least afford to pay the extra energy costs that are being wasted. So as a company, do you as developers think of that? Do you think of ways that you can even out the benefits across the board?
Yeah, sure. So I think firstly, what's important is that the regulation that will introduce those green technologies of air source heat pump, and I think it's important to highlight that's also improvements in insulation,
yes,
and other things. So air source is sort of the extreme aspect.
There's no silver bullet, is there?
Yeah, no. So the regulation covers all houses. So whether you're buying a £100,000 house off us or over £500,000 house of us, they will all have the same types of technology and deliver the efficiency. So I suppose what's great about new build is you actually get the same technology, whatever house you buy, whether it's a 1-bed or a 5-bed or an apartment, you're actually getting the same outcome. I think probably the concern is more in refurbishment market, which, as you know, is not something we do. But what I think is important to highlight is that as part of the journey to getting green, there are numerous steps before you get to the air source heat pump.
Right.
And they are much lower in cost, whether it's adding insulation in your loft or it's improving the air tightness, or it's just driving some of the other efficiencies around your sort of heating and hot water that will help before you get to sort of solar panels, as we call it, photovoltaics and heat pumps.
But you've also got to educate people, haven't you? You've got to educate them on how to use these innovations and how to run their own homes.
Yeah, great. So I mean, for me, what's exciting about the new sort of generation and what we're seeing now is, you know, you've just got to look at YouTube, and there are many ways that you can educate people. One of the projects we're doing specifically with a number of air source heat pumps is we're starting to deliver early. So I have actually already got a site where we're putting air source heat pumps, and we're working with the customers there, the manufacturer, to understand how we do that education. And it's some simple stuff. So for example, on that site, every month, the manufacturer comes into the show home and we invite customers to come and learn about air source heat pumps and how to use them, as well as videos. And we will look to roll that out further.
Okay. I mean, you mentioned refurbishments and improvements in older properties. We'll leave that for another day because that's such a complex subject, isn't it? I don't know. Here in Canary Wharf, for instance, one of the questions you often get on these blocks is, if you're applying for a mortgage, are you expecting your building to be there in 25 years? And of course, where development was rife here 25 years ago, and people were allowed to build pretty well whatever they wanted in whatever format, as long as it hit building regulations, you know, that's quite a real question here. And there's a lot of these developments have been knocked down and 70 stories put in the place of 20 or 10.
Yeah.
So that's all right. And I don't mind that as a sort of ethos, because that does allow progression in building techniques and all sorts of things. I'm interested, though, with such a national developer such as yourselves, how you arrive at the mix and balance of things that you're going to do. I mean, it's very pleasing to hear you say that you're going to apply the same principles to both the bottom end of the market and the top end. That's marvellous. The only slight flaw in that, as far as I can see, is that looking at some data yesterday, it seems that there's only 30% of 18 to 35-year-olds that are now house owners. Okay, so that means your first-time buyer market has shrunk possibly by half from when I was a kid buying a house for the first time. Do you think that way when you're planning developments? Do you say, well, we're really cutting down on the bottom end, so this isn't really going to apply?
Well, so what will happen is, I mean, as I said to you, it's not really my area, but the principle of it is when we buy a piece of land, we will look at the demographic and the need within that area, and we'll build homes that meet that need. And first-time buyers will always be a need. Now, I think just linked to sustainability and green, one of the interesting things that might help first-time buyers is because we're going to put these technologies in that reduce their bills, I can see a future where green mortgages may allow them to have extra funding to buy houses, which I think will be, so I think hopefully a positive to getting a more sustainable home.
Well, I think that would be a marvellous positive, but what would be the encouragement or the inducement for a lender to give, shall we say, extra mortgage facilities to a green homeowner? What would be the incentive for them?
The work we've been doing, and the way I understand this, and I'm not a mortgage expert, but the principle is mortgages and the amount that they'll lend you is related to obviously what you earn and what you spend, so that you have sufficient funds to pay for that mortgage. So if you think that a house we build, a new house we build compared to an old house, you could save up to £2,500 a year. That gives you that extra funding. And what we're looking at is, could that extra funding that's available to you be used to increase the amount you can borrow?
Right.
That's the principles. That's one. And then the second one that is already out there, I think Leeds have got a really good sort of green mortgage currently, where they're giving you a better percentage rate on your mortgage.
Okay, but what is their incentive for doing that, apart from the social side of things? I mean, there's got to be a financial reward for them, hasn't there?
Yeah, I suppose two. One, it opens the market more to more people gaining mortgages.
Okay.
So that would be a good incentive. And actually, they have a huge incentive, as from when I'm speaking to them, from their investors, to reduce the carbon content of their portfolio.
Right.
So now, they've got loads of drivers like we all have around sustainability.
Yes,
now.
I suppose so. It's just old cynics like me
No,
that want to ask the questions. So just looking at it, you're putting a lot of time and effort into building model sustainable housing and spending a lot of time, no doubt, experimenting. Tell me some of the things that you're coming across. We've mentioned briefly heat pumps. That's one thing. Insulation in the roof is another thing. Although I'm a little sceptical of that, because if you insulate your roof, it just means it goes out the bottom faster, doesn't it? Really, if you're not careful.
Not careful. Yeah.
There's no one single thing, is there?
No,
that's the issue.
So I suppose if I took you through the journey that we've been through since the government defined they wanted to get to zero carbon, we've built two concept houses where the best way to explain it is I've put 50 ingredients into the home, 50 technologies, of which I'll only use 10 to 15 to make the perfect cake.
Okay.
That zero carbon home.
Right.
And we are testing those with Salford University. That's our partner. And actually one of those houses is in an environmental chamber where I can go from -20 to +40 in 48 hours. So I can look at climate change on top of that. So it's linked to your future.
Yeah.
What does because the future today and how our homes perform, if our temperatures go higher and lower, we have more extremes, we need to know the houses we're thinking of today work then. Now, when we're testing those technologies, we're actually putting customers in there and we're testing them to understand the impact that how they work together, because that's where it usually goes wrong.
Right.
If I'm honest with you, it's not that the individual technologies don't work when they're put in a lab and tested. It's when we get them all onto a site, put them all together and say, do you now work?
Right,
and that's what's so critical about the work we're doing. So it's nearly over a year that we've been working on these houses and testing them. And then some of the learning we're putting onto live sites. So down at Bath, I've got a site of 82 units at Nunney where we're putting air source heat pumps in, as I've explained. So, so that's how we're doing it. And I think you picked up on a really important point. And I don't think you're being a cynic. I think like many people, you want to make sure that if you buy a new home, the technologies in there work, and you want to know how to make them work. What we're trying to do, I suppose, is robustly review everything and develop it so that when we do roll it out, our customers, it's sort of, they don't really have to think about it. It's a natural progression. Yes. So I always say that they shouldn't feel like they're living in a home that's different. It should be just like they were living in their previous home. The technologies are sort of hidden. You don't need to know about them in a way. They work without you interfering in them if you don't want to.
Yeah, I understand that. And interesting, you mentioned you're trying to cater for different changes in climate. It might be warmer, might be colder. Mm-hmm. Who knows where we're going? We've had both, haven't we?
We have.
The ice age. We've
had extremes as
well.
Yeah,
we've had extremes. I guess one of the problems with our housing in this country is that we do hang on to our housing for a long time, and we've got streets full of Victorian terraces and things like that, and much older too. Do you have a projected life cycle for a new development that you build?
So there's 2 points to that. From a regulatory point of view, there's a number of years that you have to build buildings to, but 50 years. So what that means is basically you're looking at an event that would happen in every 50 years. So high winds, or a bit
like the
whatever.
Environment Agency flood model.
That's it, exactly like that.
1 in 50, 1 in 100.
50, 1 in 100. Yeah. So you structurally, weather protection, all the different regulations. They design homes with a lot of safety factor to last for a long period of time, and that's why what you've said. We've got houses that have been built throughout the centuries that are still here with us now.
Yeah.
If you meet those building regulations, as a minimum you'll meet those periods of time. But we both know the houses we build today will be here for hundreds of years to come.
Yes. Well, unfortunately, I think they will. Yeah.
Yes, they will. But I think what's important for me is what we're now doing with all this testing and the new houses we're building is we're doing a lot of learning around the technologies and how they get applied. And what's exciting is that many of the trades that are used in our sector actually do work in refurbishment, so they can transfer that knowledge across to refurbishment. It's not a like for like, but you can put an air source heat pump on the refurbed unit. I accept your cost discussion. You can put insulation. You asked about other technologies. I just want to touch on a few just out of interest. So we've got skirting board now that is actually a radiator.
Yeah.
So you don't have a radiator on the wall. You have skirting, which helps in refurbishment.
Yeah.
Because one of the big things in refurbishment is you'd have to replace your pipes and your radiators.
Yeah.
Because an air source heat pump, the water's colder, so you need more surface area.
Yeah.
We're also looking at infrared. So it's just a more efficient way of using electric heating. So that's coming, and it's quite big in other sectors like commercial sector use it quite a lot. But we're looking at it in housing, and actually when we look at other markets like Holland and Sweden and Austria, they use quite a lot of infrared in their housing. So there are quite interesting technologies.
Doesn't infrared heating though just focus on? It's got to focus on an object. Yeah.
It heats you or an object.
Yeah.
What's great about it is it's instant.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
So the house we've got infrared around it, and it will follow you, and it will only put the heating on in the room you're in.
Right.
Which means you're using less energy. Because what do we usually do? We put the heating on at home, and you heat the whole home, but you're sat in the lounge.
Yes, of course.
So you're actually heating bedrooms and other rooms that you don't really need the heat to be at.
Yes.
Whereas with infrared and some of the smart technology we're looking at, it'll know you're in the lounge.
But the regs are going to have to change for that, aren't they? Because I think when an architect designs a house, he has to meet certain regulations in terms of heat volume per room per square metre.
He does.
Yeah.
But you can still switch it on and off. So the
regulation
needs it to be able to heat the room at a certain rate, but it doesn't have to be on unless you want it. Okay. So that's sort of the interesting dynamic in it that could reduce bills, because that's quite a big thing. And then probably the last one that's worth mentioning, our new homes, and as the market in refurbishment jumps on that whole sort of solar panel where we're going to produce a lot of electricity. The big challenge is storage and how we work on the grid. Now, that's where I think new build and refurbishment market have a great combined opportunity.
Okay. All right. Well, look, we're going to go to a break now. So join me after the break when I'll be asking Oliver some more questions about his green innovations. Join me then in a few moments. Hello and welcome back to Heart to Property Matters. I'm Stephen Galpin and I'm with Oliver Novakovic, who is Technical and Innovation Director for Barratt Developments. Oliver, we've covered quite a bit of ground in the first half of the show. I want to talk to you now about government's involvement in all this. It does seem, and I suppose it's pretty obvious, while we live in a sort of 4-year cycle of elections, no one government is going to really be able to do very much over a long period of time unless there is mutual agreement across politics, which is probably a bit unlikely, isn't it? But listening to a programme the other day, for instance, Michael Gove was talking about floating these solar panels into space and beaming down the energy, the power, the heat, whatever it is, to the UK. And somebody says, yeah, well, where's it going to? What's it going to do on the ground? And he sort of said, oh, no, well, we haven't thought of that yet. But on the other hand, they've spent billions of pounds trying to develop this idea. How effective do you think government intervention is in all this? Or do you think they ought to stay out of it and just encourage industry to do their bit?
I think government intervention is important, because you've got to think in all industries, there are people that will want to lead the way and you don't need government legislation for them. But there are always people that will want to stay back from it and not do anything if they could get away with it. So I think government setting the 2025 target is really important. I think we need more clarity and timelines associated with that, and I think it needs to span more than the 4 years. I think it needs to go a much greater period. It needs to be cross-party agreement on it as well. But I think for the first time ever, industry, like we've already set a 2030 target that goes beyond the 2025 target, and others are looking at that. And that's because I think industry recognises to survive, we're going to have to be sustainable.
Yeah.
So we sort of want to, for the first time I can remember, we're actually looking to lead that sustainable drive, and we just need government to come alongside us and together, because it's about UK PLC, isn't it?
Yes.
It's not about industry government, it's all of us together moving towards that zero carbon agenda. So I think government plays an important role because I think it sets the minimum standards, but I think industry will play as important a role in driving and going further than what governments say.
I guess the worry that I have is, I think I was as guilty as most. 7 years ago, we were all encouraged to buy diesel cars, weren't we? We were told this was the way to go, and I did buy one. I then went electric because diesel became an absolute no-no, and it's today an absolute no-no. I think I bought an electric car a little bit early, to be honest.
Okay.
I think I've gone back to petrol, but I think I'd go back to electricity probably next year when we get the 400-500 mile range. But there is resistance to new ideas. And now what I'm thinking in particular, hydrogen, for instance. Mm-hmm. If you just look at the the data on that, I mean, it's an obvious choice, isn't it? I mean, all it leaves behind is water.
Okay.
Perfect. It seems to be manageable, but there is a huge resistance to people having hydrogen gas pumped into their kitchens to have the cooker work on it or the boiler work on it. Why is this? Why are we so resistant to innovative ideas?
I don't think so I think we're resistant to innovative ideas if we don't show our customers and people the journey we've taken to put it in front of them, and we don't take a very clear, robust rollout in it. So we've been innovating in other sectors, automotive industry with electric vehicles and others, and in the construction industry, and there's some many successful stories of innovation. But I think I agree with you. What we do is we sort of go from doing nothing to doing everything in a step, and don't take everyone along the line with us. So for me, with Barratt in our innovation journey, we're very much, as I've said, that's why we've got these projects where we're looking at all the different technologies and we're getting to understand them.
And running them side by side.
Side by side. And it's the consequential impacts of hydrogen, the consequential impact of, so I think hydrogen has a place in heavy industry and others, but in housing, currently, the cost of producing the hydrogen, it isn't as efficient as doing it using wind turbines and other technology and using an air source heat pump, because you get a 1-to-3 ratio with an air source heat pump. So it's that you've got to look at the whole story before you come up. And I mean, one of the things we do, we sort of, in some ways, we have lots of options available, because I don't think we actually know what we're truly going to end up with.
Well, this is the problem. And again, whether you're a big developer or a small developer, or whether you're refurbing your own home, you go and buy a heat pump or whatever, put it in, spend your 15, 20, 30,000 pounds doing it with all the sort of peripheral work you've got to do. And then somebody in 2 years' time says, no, they're not efficient. They use too much electricity, they make too much noise. No, forget all that. So the payback time is long enough anyway, isn't it?
Yeah, I think, well, two things. So it's probably about 10,000 for an air source heat pump to be refurbed. Let's not, because I think the 20,000 is when you put PVs and you actually go fully to zero carbon, just to help a little bit. So 10, maybe it would go up to 15, but around 10,000, and there's grant funding for refurb. What's important is you could make those mistakes, but I think if you're someone looking to do this, probably if you did a little bit of research, what you'd see is that air source heat pumps in Norway and Sweden, 8 out of 10 houses have an air source heat pump. Right. France is quickly catching up. So these technologies, there are hundreds of thousands of them going in all over the world, Japan. So with air source, I don't think you'd make a mistake. Now, I'm not saying that something might come out that's better, but I think that you'd never do anything, because it's like the phone. You'd never buy a phone, because every 6 months a better product comes out. So I can see your point, but I suppose a bit of me thinks we as an industry need to get those technologies to a point where if you decide on whichever one, at the time they are a good decision.
There's got to be some longevity.
Yes,
there,
agreed.
Yeah,
I fully agree with that.
Now, the other thing is, I mean, I've known about Barratt's for all of my lifetime, and I have great respect for what you do. You build a huge range of homes from small studio flats to lovely housing estates. Now, what I suppose the point there is that you're very good at your planning applications. You understand your industry. You know what to go for. You know what you'll get. You don't waste time on that. You're very successful. So I don't understand why you're building a new housing estate, whether it's 10, 50 houses or whatever, you don't have your own windmill and produce your own electricity.
Okay.
Right? But looking at the planning regs, you'd probably get the planning for your houses, but the chances of you getting a windmill with permission is pretty remote, isn't it?
Yeah. So
why is that?
Well, I mean, I was looking at some information just last night where they were stating that we've only had 4 wind turbines come through in the last few years, which was a bit astounding for me. And that there was a comment where one wind turbine that was supported by everybody, the community, the planners, everybody, took 7 years.
So who's blocking that? The government?
I think I think it's difficult. I think in those situations, there are you could have planners, you could have the community, you could have the local authority, you could have government. There are lots of people that can affect that decision.
Okay.
So I think it'd be unfair to sort of point at one. As an engineer, so the work we're doing is to work out what is the best option for the type of building you're putting together, and the option for apartments are very different to houses.
Yeah.
So whilst you might just say an air source heat pump, one will use an air source heat pump outside the home with a cylinder inside. The apartments will actually use a cylinder inside with a little air source heat pump on top and may use electric heating.
Okay.
So they're very different and relevant to the size and location. So obviously, if your site was on the other side of a mountain that the wind couldn't get to, you don't want to put a wind turbine in there because it wouldn't turn.
Sure.
So I think what's, for me, I suppose, in some ways exciting and why we have a sort of decision tree on what you do is because relevant to the site, to the customers, what you're building, you will have a decision. So there is no silver bullet. So you don't say air source heat pumps, and because in some sites you might go district. So what you might have is a big air source heat pump or a ground source heat pump in a central location, or a number of them.
So we go back to community heating and cooling.
Which is in London is very popular. You have a lot of community.
Yeah.
So that might be an option. And actually, if you look at Sweden and Norway, that is their approach. They're much more communal.
Yeah.
And I think we're just understanding that. So, because you wouldn't want to do a community heating system on, say, a 50-house low-rise site, because it's not viable.
So I suppose that I suppose we could even go and say, look, some of the Eastern European countries that are still using communal heating and whatever, we've sort of mocked them for that for many years, and now we're actually going back that way, aren't we?
Well, yeah, I mean,
and there's common sense to it.
Well, if you look at Sweden and Norway, as I said, they're doing it, and they're using a lot of waste in heating. We're doing it. I mean, I was down in Exeter on a site with E.ON, and they were doing a big communal heating on low-rise housing that was very interesting. So we're actually looking at it as well. So I think there's a lot of work still needed to, and being done to ensure we have the best solution for each type of development that we end up doing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, Oliver, I'm going to thank you very much for coming in today and sharing your knowledge. I'm sure that will give peace in a lot of minds that are quite worried about all this sort of thing. It's also very pleasing to know that Barratt Developments, one of our biggest house builders in the country, are taking things so seriously and doing it with a great deal of responsibility. And I know the amount of money you're putting into research is quite phenomenal, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, that's right.
So, Oliver Novakovic, Technical Director of Barratt's Homes and Developments, thank you very much for coming in. Thank you for sharing your information. I'm Stephen Galpin. Join me again next time on Property Matters.